Yeah, I mean, I think there are different ways to stand out in your resume or cover letter. One way I prioritize anyone that submitted a resume is if
As this channel has grown, I've really done my best to try and use it to not only share my experience and perspective, but those of others as well. And that's why I'm really excited today to have Brady on the show. He's actually a former colleague of mine and is now a business development manager at a high growth startup who literally gave out 2 offers this week. He's going to walk us through his thought process on how to even select who to interview in the first place, but also things to look out for when you're having multiple stages of interviews, when you're performing those final round exercises, etc. If you're in that position where you're trying to break into tech sales, prep for interviews, I know you're going to get a ton out of this. And I'd also add, if you're looking for a more guided approach and direct coaching from me and top performers in my network, you can check out our bootcamp Tech Sales Ascension in the description below. But I hope you enjoy this conversation and get as much out of it as I did.
Brady is actually a former coworker of mine, now a BDR manager at Coalesce. Sure, he'll provide more details, but among many of the reasons that I wanted to talk to him, he also comes from a pretty unique background, actually dropping out of college, trying to start his own business, finding his way now into sales, and just, I think, a really unique person to learn from. But Brady, would love to kick it over to you. Take this any way you want, but maybe starting with your background and kind of that unconventional path that I mentioned.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it, Eric. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I've definitely had a pretty unique entry into sales, not the typical route as you kind of alluded to. So, yeah, I mean, my background's grew up in Portland, Oregon. Went to school for engineering at Oregon State, and pretty quickly realized that wasn't really my, what I wanted to do for my career in the long run. And during that time was pretty involved with business and was really getting into the sales world. And so opportunity for me at a digital marketing agency actually opened up as kind of entry level BDR type of position, working with, SMB mid-market clients for doing PPC and SEO kind of work. And pretty quickly realized I had the knack for sales and was able to move up to managing a small team there. And during that time, I had this kind of entrepreneurial bug in me to, start my own business and really be my own boss. And that kind of led me to, starting my own little marketing agency. A couple of buddies, we're pretty young and trying to figure it out as we go. So definitely failed more than succeeded, but we're able to get some clients under the business and had some success, but realized I was still pretty young. I think I was 23, 24 years old at that time. So, wanted to maybe take a step back, get back into the corporate world and kind of build up my skills, to eventually maybe, start my business again. Who knows where things would go, but it's kind of what led me into the tech sales world. I was actually able to leverage some of my network that I had that was already inside of tech sales to see if there was any open opportunities given my sales and business background, and kind of realized I'd probably have to start at the ground floor as an SDR and kind of grow my way in. So that's how I was able to kind of break my foot into the door with a company called Warescape. It's an automation tool in the data and analytics space. And I was able to start there as an SDR, work my way up through the ladder to becoming an AE, enterprise AE, close some business, eventually made my way over to working with Eric at MariaDB, and kind of, an opportunity with some past coworkers open for this new startup company I'm at now called Coalesce, managing the business development team here at North America. So yeah, that's a quick high level of my background and how I got to where I'm at today.
Nice. No, it's really cool, and I think a lot of people, especially like some of the folks that we're working with that don't maybe have that traditional college degree background, don't value those other experiences. And I think, yeah, maybe even double tapping into that right before we get into kind of your own hiring criteria. You touched on like networking with friends of yours that had broken into tech sales. If there's anything, you coming from even like business ownership, right, to now becoming an employee and or just not having the formal degree and things of that nature, networking, what are some other things that like really worked? And was that even an issue, right, that you didn't have a degree?
I don't really think so. I think sales is different from other, verticals that you can get into. Obviously, if you want to be a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, things like that, you probably need a degree. If you want to get into sales, it's really just about the effort that you put in and your willingness to kind of learn, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and essentially just hustle your way there. I kind of see sales as your own business within the company. And so I was kind of able to leverage that experience as to why, I would be self-sufficient, self-motivated to be successful as an SDR. So leveraging that, and yeah, I mean, my network that was already in sales definitely helped, as well as just getting, in social with LinkedIn. There's tons of tools, and obviously people like Eric, teaching about different ways to break into tech sales. And so I really think leveraging, the education that's out there with YouTube and LinkedIn, as far as, what is an SDR? What does an SDR do? And really just understanding the lingo behind that in the SaaS world, helped me kind of get a leg up, and things you're probably not going to learn in college anyways.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so now, over this past year, you've grown the business development leg from 0 to 5, basically, that are now onboarding. You literally just hired people, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah.
this is exciting to, I think, really tap into your perspective in terms of evaluation criteria and things of that nature. I'd leave it open-ended. I don't want to guide you one way or the other, but I'm sure there's phases of it, whether it's like even just getting in from resume to now the first conversation with you, to the conversation with the broader team, right? However you want to take that, maybe start high level of how you even begin to evaluate a candidate, and we'll break it down from there.
Yeah, definitely. So I had the luxury of being, in charge of reviewing all the resumes that came through, and there's quite a few. And so yeah, I mean, I think there are different ways to stand out in your resume or cover letter. One way I prioritized anyone that submitted a resume is if they reached out to me on LinkedIn directly, or reached out to one of my colleagues directly on LinkedIn and said, hey, I just applied for this, wanted to make sure I didn't get lost in the weeds, really interested because of XYZ, would love to chat. That in itself is what you do as an SDR, right? Like, you're selling yourself to become the position. And so I had quite a few people that did that throughout the process. And for me, that showed the willingness that they're putting in the effort, they're making the effort to connect with me and show why they want to work here. So that was pretty much an automatic, at least intro interview with myself. As far as resume goes, I think really just understanding the space of the company that you're in and how your past experience can, apply to that. Even if it's not directly working in the space, there's tons of people that come from, the restaurant industry, or, tons of industries that have sales aspects to it. I think talking about how that could apply to the tech sales world stood out to me. And so, as well as, again, going back to the free education, there's education courses online, there's LinkedIn Learning, there's things on YouTube that you could use to apply for the SaaS and SDR role. And so when people would outline those, to me, it just shows that they're taking the initiative to want to make a transition into sales. And yeah, and I appreciated that. So those are a couple of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, restating what stood out to me, I think the direct message to the hiring manager and or recruiter is something I have always recommended. And I think you mentioned it, but after you apply as well, I don't know if you came into scenarios where like they didn't message you before they applied, and then they message you and it's like, cool, send me your info. Like, I don't have, it's like, it kind of looks bad, right? Anyway, I digress. But also I think I would love to tap into as well some of those unconventional backgrounds that you may be taking conversations with, right? Like someone from the restaurant industry, someone who's a mechanic on cars or something, I don't know, right? How are they tying it? What are maybe an example, if you have one that comes to mind that really stood out to you and got just a conversation, a seat at the table, right?
Yeah, I don't know if any specific. I'm sure there are that definitely like intrigued me. There were some that were like college athletes and things like that, and athletes in school and how that applied to sales. But for the restaurant industry, for example, I know there's people that outline, hey, I evaluated our current process as being a server and understood that using certain tactics as a server increased the amount of tips we were getting, among the team, things like that. Like, those are what's going to apply in the sales world. bringing your own creativity, testing out new strategies, showing your willingness to, change and try new things out. So whenever I saw someone taking initiative on themselves and trying to implement that and highlighting that on their resume, those are definitely things that stood out to me as someone, we're in a remote world now. A lot of sales is remote. And so there's kind of that self-sufficiency, self-motivation aspect to the remote world that's really important for you to take initiative and implement, your own changes, strategies, things like that.
Nice. Yeah. And maybe more, as we're getting into like the interview itself, right? Depending on how picky you might be, right? Are there things that have been, again, an open-ended question, but you start a conversation with someone and you see within a minute, like, okay, like we need to shut this down. It's not going to happen. Maybe we start there, common mistakes, and then we'll go to the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. I essentially open my intro kind of screening interview, if you want to call it, the same way pretty much every time, where, I would say, hey, let's keep this pretty high level. I want to get to know you more, your backgrounds, like why this company, why being an SDR, and then let them ask me questions at the end. And then I would say, perfect, I'll pass the mic to you. Would love to hear more about your background, your story, what you're looking for in a new role, and essentially just let them take it whatever direction they want to go. And when they start out in kind of that storytelling piece, it was pretty clear if they were able just to hold a conversation and tell a story in a way, in their background in a way that made sense and would add value to me. And so some things that maybe weren't best practices is when they would keep it super short. There's some people that would be, 2-3 minutes for their background and that was it. Some people 7, 8, 9 minutes and really talking through their background, why they want to get into tech sales, how different experiences apply to sales, and then why they're looking for a role and why, our position stood out for them. When they had kind of some clear answers behind that, I could tell that, they cared about this and they did their homework essentially.
And just to clarify there too, when you're saying, 7 to 9, 10 minutes, like that's a back and forth conversation.
Yeah.
That's not a monologue, right? Just to clarify.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah, back and forth. I'll definitely chime in and ask some questions, but that's like their background, going through their story, their experience for, 7, 8, 9 minutes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I digress. I don't want to get too off track, but certainly some things that I've talked about in the past in terms of structuring your resume in a way that you have and create that natural interest to where someone like Brady can come in and say, oh, that's cool. Like, tell me more about this, right? Like, right. You don't have to overcomplicate and tell, like, what is Brady thinking? Like, what is the perfect thing to say? I digress. But no, it's really good perspective. And when you're thinking about maybe just beyond, tell me a little bit more about the process as well, past you, right? Does the other team get involved? Are they largely trusting your judgment? Would you say that's like an 80% of the criteria? Any insights there?
Yeah, so for our process, not sure how unique this is compared to other companies, but for us, pretty stress-free, I would like to think. The way it worked with us is I would handle like the initial kind of screening call. If it seemed like a decent fit, I would move them on to the next round, which would be a call with one of our sales directors. Those are essentially our account executives here within Coalesce. They would have a similar conversation as I did, kind of get to know each other, talk through the background, and then they would get a little bit more strategic about, what's your frame of mind around prospecting? How would you, get into an enterprise account? Things like that, just to make sure the person kind of had a frame of mind and strategy when it came to prospecting, approaches and kind of their game plan essentially coming into a new territory. If that call went well, then we would move them to like we called it a mock prospecting scenario, where essentially we would walk them through our value props, our ICP, and they would give them a homework assignment and say, hey, find us, a target prospect at an account that you think would be a good fit. Type up just a super high level first touch email. And then we'll do a mock cold call as if we were that prospect that you chose. And so we would give them all the tools and necessary, all the resources to be able to, talk to our value props. And it wasn't graded on technical accuracy or anything like that. Really just to get a sense of, okay, what's your writing style? What's your approach to this? as well as how do you handle yourself on your toes on a cold call. And so that was, like pretty much the final step. Essentially, we could really tell who was going to be a good fit and who wasn't from that. And then there was a couple more leadership calls, just kind of bring our leadership in and make sure they kind of gave their thumbs up as well.
Sure. And let's take the scenario too. One thing that I emphasize often is, especially as you're getting to later rounds, like you really have to be the best candidate. I don't know if that resonates with you, but we've kind of filtered from the candidates that maybe aren't qualified through those first couple of rounds. Now, as we're getting to the final, maybe twofold again. Are there things that make someone stand out the most, and or on these later stages, is there something that you see that you just can't get over and makes you go with the other candidate, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to preparation. We definitely didn't expect anyone to be an expert in what we're doing without actually, training with us and selling with us. It was more of, hey, how did this person come prepared to the call? Did it seem like they actually did research and use the resources that we send them? Our value props are listed on their website. The people that honestly did the best just copied the direct verbiage on our website and utilized that within their emails. So it's not rocket science. Use the resources that are there. It's more about, did they prepare that and apply it in a way that made sense? And so, yeah, there's definitely people that stood out with the way they wrote their email. You could tell that they've either been trained, they've gone through some training courses and really learned, the best way to personalize kind of a first touch email. Our strategy for outbounds and, cold prospecting is definitely more of, let's be as personalized as we possibly can. So, that stood out in the email. And then on the cold call part, really just them being able to handle themselves on their toes and on their feet. I would throw them curveballs that I knew that they were not going to have the answer to, but being able to move through the call in kind of a mock live scenario, you could tell that they were just comfortable and confident within themselves.
No, thanks a ton for the perspective, Brady. And like, it's really cool you haven't gone and hired people recently. Any other thoughts too? This was great insight, but if I maybe missed anything or there's something that comes to mind that is particularly relevant, would love to give you the chance.
No, nothing I could think of. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just kind of take your own initiative, reach out and treat the interview process as a sale itself. I think that'll really show like you want this job and you want to break into the industry.
Nice. Well, appreciate it as always, Brady, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric.